Today, what are the 4 great discoveries of modern science that prove God exists? The first great discovery of modern science is that the universe had a beginning. Where did it come from? Historian of science Fred Burnham has written, "The God hypothesis is now a more persuasive and respectable hypothesis than at any time in the last 100 years. The second great scientific discovery is that space and time also had a beginning. This discovery demands an explanation. It calls for a transcendent cause beyond the universe itself. The third great discovery of modern science is that the laws and constants of the universe have been fine-tuned for human life to exist. As physicist Fred Hoyle has written, a common-sense interpretation of the evidence suggests a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry as well as biology to make life possible. The fourth great discovery of modern science is the digital code embedded in the DNA molecule in every human cell. The 3 billion characters of precise information in the digital code instruct the cell how to build complex molecules to do the work so the cell can stay alive. Where did this specified information come from? It is compelling evidence of an intelligent designer for the origin of human life. My guest today, who will explain these 4 great scientific discoveries, is Dr. Stephen Meyer, who received his PhD in the philosophy of science from Cambridge University. He is co-founder of the intelligent design movement in the world and a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute. We invite you to join us for this special edition of the John Ankerberg Show.
Welcome to our program. We're talking to Dr. Stephen Meyer, philosopher of science who got his PhD at Cambridge in England. He's written a best-selling book, Signature in the Cell, that we've been looking at in past programs, DNA and the Evidence for Intelligent Design. And he is talking about where did everything come from? Where did the universe come from? What is the latest scientific evidence? And why is this refuting the new atheists and the materialistic, naturalistic worldview? And Stephen, for folks that missed last week, kind of summarize that and then we're going to move on.
Well, the stunning discovery of early 20th century cosmology was that the universe has a definite beginning. And this discovery was made as a result of an observation that was first made by Edwin Hubble, an astronomer who was working in Southern California. And he began to work in the early 1920s using these great new dome telescopes that were being built then. This is the 200-inch dome telescope at the Palomar Observatory at Mount Wilson. Hubble was using a telescope like this that was able to capture large amounts of light from the night sky and therefore able to resolve little tiny pinpricks of light and show that those pinpricks had structure. And what he discovered was that in every direction of the night sky there were galaxies galore. There were spindle nebula and spiral nebula, and in fact if you zeroed in on any small quadrant of the night sky and then magnified that, you would find that there were galaxies just loaded in any little window that you might want to look at. And so that was the first discovery. But what was even more mind-blowing is the realization that these galaxies are moving away from us, that the further away they are, the faster they're receding. And the only way to make sense of that observation was to posit that the universe is expanding something like a balloon in what's called a spherical expansion. And so I have a little visual aid to review what we discussed last time, but basically, as you go forward in time, the universe is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, like this. Now that raises an interesting question, and this was where it got really interesting. And what happens if the universe is expanding as we go forward in time? What was it like at any point in the past?
You go back in time.
As you go back in time, it's like those old cartoons when suddenly the cartoon character would start backing up as the film was being rolled backwards. Well, if you roll the timeline backwards of the cosmos, you eventually get back to a point where all the matter begins to congeal into one place, and you get the beginning of the expansion, and in fact the beginning of the universe. Now, this observation or this conclusion was eventually reinforced by Einstein himself. Now, Einstein didn't like the conclusion at first. Oddly, he'd come to it independently because of the development of his theory of general relativity, a theory of gravitation that implied that the universe must be expanding and decelerating, much like the shrapnel from a firecracker as it blows out. But, of course, a firecracker begins with a bang. There was a beginning point. And Einstein initially didn't like this conclusion. He attempted to fudge it by introducing an arbitrary value for one of the terms in his equation describing the gravitational field of the universe. But he eventually came to realize that he was wrong when he was invited out to Southern California by Edwin Hubble, and he was brought to the observatory in Pasadena and was shown what Hubble was himself seeing through the telescope. He came out after a kind of staged demonstration in the telescope and announced to the media, "I now see the necessity of a beginning," in his heavy German accent. And he later said that missing this conclusion was the greatest mistake of his scientific career. In fact, he anticipated it in his great theory, but he ended up trying to fudge it by adding this arbitrary mathematical value. But that, he said, was the greatest mistake. So by the early 1930s, you had two powerful strains of evidence and theory that were confirming a definite beginning to the universe. And that was very upsetting to a lot of scientists.
Why was it upsetting?
Well, one of the first scientists to react to the what was soon called the Big Bang, well, later called the Big Bang Theory, was a man named Arthur Eddington. And he was a leading astrophysicist in Britain at the time, and he just flat out didn't like the idea that there was a beginning to the universe. This is what he said. He said, philosophically, he said, the notion of a beginning of the present order is repugnant to me. I should like to find a genuine loophole. I simply do not believe the present order of things started off with a bang. The expanding universe is preposterous. And then he said, it leaves me cold. And I love this quotation because Eddington, right out of the chute, tells you what's bothering him. You know, it's not. Sometimes I joke when I'm giving public presentations on this. I said, I'll say that Eddington's theory was what we call in the theory in psychology that we call denial. You know, he didn't really have any good scientific reason. It was just philosophically offensive. He was wedded to this 19th century worldview that we call scientific materialism, that posits that the universe is eternal and self-existent and has no beginning. And the scientific evidence was showing exactly the opposite thing, and it was upsetting to him. And another physicist explained a little bit more about why this was upsetting. This was Robert Dicke at Princeton in the 1960s, and he says, an infinitely old universe would relieve us of the necessity of understanding the origin of matter at any finite time in the past. That's what's at stake. If we have an infinite universe, we don't have to think about the universe beginning at a point in time, and therefore we don't have to think about what caused everything to come into existence. We can just assume that it was eternal and self-existent. But if there's a definite beginning, then we have established the need to explain the universe by reference to something beyond it. And that seems to point to a need for a kind of transcendent cause, which was uncomfortably like the notion of God for many scientists who were of this kind of materialistic or atheistic mindset. So that's the rub.
Stephen, define what a transcendent cause is of the universe.
Well, just simply, we're talking about a cause that's beyond the universe itself. If the universe is characterized by space and time, and then matter and energy within that space and time, a transcendent cause is something that is beyond those domains that we experience in the universe. So, you know, what we're talking about is unlike any other event. It's the origin of everything we know. It's the origin of the physical world itself. So if it comes into existence suddenly from nothing physical, then we have to either say it happened for no reason at all, it has no cause, which is kind of nonsensical, or else the cause of the universe comes from beyond it, from a transcendent realm.
Well, and obviously naturalistic, materialistic scientists didn't like that, and so they didn't like this thing of a beginning point.
Well, this is very, very troubling. I had the opportunity to attend a conference in 1985 where I heard Alan Sandage speak, and Sandage was first the student of Edwin Hubble and later a very prominent cosmologist and astronomer in his own right. He was deeply involved in verifying the expansion of the universe by showing that each of the galaxies in all different quadrants of the sky were in fact receding, were moving away. And when I heard him speak, he was describing the evidence for the Big Bang, for the definite origin of the universe and time, and he said this, he said, here is evidence. He looked into the camera, it was very gritty kind of determination. He wasn't exactly happy about this when he was first discovering it, apparently, and he says, here is evidence for what can only be described as a supernatural event. What he meant was, this event points to a cause that lies beyond nature, because nature is what we're talking about here. Nature is what's been brought into existence. So, and he goes on to say, there's no way this could have been predicted or explained from within the realm of physics as we know it. It's pointing beyond physics. And that's
quite a statement right there.
It's an incredible statement, and it rocked my world when I first heard him talk about this. He actually was a long-time agnostic who'd come to belief in God because of, not in spite of, the scientific evidence.
Talk about Robert Jastrow.
Well, it's another guy in the field of astronomy and cosmology that saw the theistic implications of these new discoveries. He wrote a book called God and the Astronomers. And there's a famous passage at the end of his book where he kind of sums up the dilemma that many scientists felt as a result of the evidence for a definite beginning. He said, this is an exceedingly strange development, unexpected by all but the theologians, he says. They have always accepted the word of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It is so unexpected because science has had such extraordinary success in tracing the chain of cause and effect back in time. But then you get to this beginning point, and there he says, it's like a bad dream. He says the story ends like a bad dream. The scientist has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak, and as he pulls him up over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who have been waiting there for centuries. This was kind of ironic twist to the end of it. The theologians anticipated what the scientists in the end discovered, that the universe had a definite beginning, and it was very upsetting to many, many scientists.
All right, and we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about more of the scientific evidence. We're going to talk about Stephen Hawking and his amazing discoveries that even lays this in cement even further. So stick with us. We'll be right back.
If you would like to have all of the information in our series, The 4 Great Discoveries of Modern Science That Prove God Exists, with Dr. Stephen Meyer, it's available on DVD for a gift of $49. And you may order this series now by calling us at 1-800-805-3030.
All right, back. We're talking to Dr. Stephen Meyer, philosopher of science, and we're talking about what scientists have discovered about the origin of the universe. And we've talked about the fact that the universe had a beginning, and it's been laid in cement almost by the scientific discoveries coming up to our time. And then there's another fella by the name of Stephen Hawking, and he was at Cambridge as well, and he came out with some more evidence. What did he say?
Well, in 1968, Stephen Hawking solved what are called the field equations of general relativity, Einstein's famous equations, and I popped them on the screen here. There's Einstein next to his famous equation. And what Hawking showed is that as you go back in time, you eventually reach a point where what's called the curvature of space, or the curvature of space-time, as the physicists refer to it, gets so tight that it is infinitely tight. Okay, so if you think of the mass of the universe congealing as you are closer and closer to the beginning, then you have space curving tighter and tighter as a result of that mass. That's the theory of general relativity. Now, what Hawking showed is that at some point in the finite past, you reach a point where the curvature of space is so tight, it's infinitely tight. That's a circle so tight it has no volume. And now ask yourself a question. I used to ask my students this question. How much stuff can you put in zero spatial volume? How much stuff can you put in? Well, obviously, no stuff goes in no space. And you can see, therefore, that the Big Bang Theory, as it's conjoined with general relativity to be a description of the universe as a whole, implies not only that there's a beginning in time, but there's also a beginning to space itself, and with that, a point where there is no matter, no energy, where everything from that point forward comes into existence from literally nothing physical. And so what you have in the modern scientific description of the origin of the universe is remarkably similar to an old medieval doctrine, an old idea that the universe was created ex nihilo, out of nothing physical. The universe literally pops into existence out of nothing physical. That's the implication of Hawking's solution to these key equations of general relativity.
All right, Stephen, these were mind-blowing conclusions. What were the big implications of what Stephen Hawking was talking about?
Well, Stephen Hawking and the whole revolution in cosmology that's taken place with all the different evidences that have pointed to a definite beginning for the universe, I think point to the need for a transcendent cause of some kind. Again, a cause beyond the universe itself. And this is what most of the physicists have sensed. This is what's made them incensed about the discoveries in the new cosmology, pointing to a definite beginning. But every great worldview has to answer the question, what is the thing or the entity from which everything else comes? And as you look at the Big Bang singularity, as it's called, the beginning point of time and space and matter and energy, and you ask yourself, which of the great systems of thought, the great worldviews can explain that, you realize right away there's a huge problem for the materialistic worldview, the one that we've inherited from 19th century science, because materialism, first of all, affirms that the universe is infinite in time. Well, right away the Big Bang refutes that. But beyond that, it affirms that matter is the thing from which everything else comes. And yet, if you take Stephen Hawking's discovery seriously, you realize that if you go back far enough in time, you have an infinitely tight curvature to space, which corresponds to no spatial volume, and therefore there's nowhere to put any stuff. There is no matter in the early phase of the universe. It comes into existence suddenly from nothing physical. And therefore, the materialistic worldview can't refer to anything as a cause that can account for the origin of the universe. The materialistic worldview says that matter is the end-all and be-all, the thing from which everything else comes. But matter comes into existence. It's the first effect, but it is not the cause of the origin of the universe itself. So that's a big problem. Pantheism, the Eastern worldview, also has a problem explaining the origin of the universe from nothing physical, because pantheism affirms that God is not a person. God is kind of the mystical unity that binds all of the material universe together, and God and matter are linked. They're coextensive. God is in the flowers and the trees. He's in our bodies. He's in the mountains. God and matter are coextensive, is the philosophical word.
God is all and all is God.
Exactly. But if you go back far enough and there's no matter,
there's no God.
There's no God. In both cases, with the materialistic worldview and the pantheistic worldview, there is no entity separate from the universe itself that can be invoked to bring the universe into existence, to act as a cause of the universe itself. And that's where I think that some kind of worldview that invokes a transcendent cause, like deism or theism, two worldviews that hold that there is a God separate from the universe that brought the universe into existence, are the only kind of worldviews that can really account for this evidence. And so deism is the idea that God created the universe and then has had nothing to do with it ever since, but God is still separate from the universe. And theism is the idea that God created the universe and has been actively involved in the universe ever since. But both of those worldviews posit the existence of an entity that is separate from the physical universe, and therefore they have what philosophers call the causal power to explain the universe as a whole. They posit an entity which has the capability of bringing the universe into existence out of nothing physical. Pantheism and materialism can't do that, and therefore I think the new discoveries in modern cosmology have incredible implications for these big philosophical questions that we've been debating all the way back since the ancient Greeks. Is the universe finite or infinite, and what's the thing from which everything else came? Mind, a power beyond the universe, or matter?
Stephen, this would sound like an ironclad case, okay? What's the main objection that has been raised against this?
Well, the main objection comes from a theory called quantum cosmology, and it's based on the observation that as the universe goes back far enough in time, it eventually would get to the point where it was small enough to be described by the equations of quantum mechanics. I often refer to it as the physics of the very weird, where the smallest things act like both waves and particles. And there are some mathematical equations that describe very tiny parts of matter in the way and the strange properties that they have. And when the universe is small enough, those equations would apply to the universe as a whole. And so some people have posited that when we get a theory of how gravity works at that level, it might supplant Einstein's general relativity, and we may get rid of the singularity. Now, the first thing you need to know is that we don't have a theory of quantum gravity, so we have no good reason to think that we will eventually get rid of the singularity, the beginning point. But beyond that, the quantum cosmology posits that in the very tiniest first micro milliseconds of the universe, that the universe is existing as a kind of oscillating, atemporal wave function. This is technical physics talk, but it's a timeless, non-isolating wave function.
Like in limbo.
Yeah, it's like it's in limbo, something like that. And what the equation of quantum mechanics is describing is the different possible geometries or gravitational fields that might have existed in that early non-time before the universe began in time. It's a strange way to think of it. But there's a big problem with trying to use this to get around the singular beginning. First of all, we don't have a theory of quantum gravity. But secondly, the equation of quantum mechanics that describes this early mysterious state is actually describing multiple possible states of affairs that might exist, multiple possible geometries or gravitational fields. Our universe has one geometry and one type of gravitational field. So to get from that state described by the quantum equation to the universe we have, something has to, what they call, collapse the wave packet, get rid of all the possibilities and actualize one. And in the standard, what's called Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, what collapses the wave packet, what the thing that actualizes possibilities into one, is always an observation, which is made by a mind, a person. And so the implication, even if you invoke this quantum cosmological model, you actually end up positing the need inadvertently for a cosmic observer.
You still need one.
Which is essentially the same thing as God. I mean, only God has those kind of capacities. The other option, and if you don't go with the Copenhagen model, you've got other problems, which is basically that you don't have any cause that brings the definite universe that we have into existence from an immaterial, atemporal state involving many possibilities. There's no explanation for going from the temporal or from the timeless to the temporal, no explanation for going from the immaterial, this is just a mathematical equation, that's all it is, to a real universe that has matter and energy and stuff. And there's no explanation for the infusion of information that's involved in going from all that range of possibilities to an actualized universe, because you're in a sense presented with a range of choices and you're choosing one. That's an impartation of information, and that's completely unexplained. So this quantum cosmological model either invokes a cosmic observer, or it requires an unexplained transition from no time to time, from no matter to matter, and an unexplained infusion of information. That sounds like, again, design.
All right, we're going to continue this, folks. If you find this fascinating like I do, next week we're going to talk about the next step of the scientific evidence that we've seen through the telescope, and that's the fine-tuning of the universe and how this plays into the equation. It's adding evidence on top of evidence for a theistic conclusion of where everything came from. You won't want to miss that, so please join us next week.
Stay tuned for scenes from next week's program. If you would like to have all of the information in our new series, The 4 Great Discoveries of Modern Science That Prove God Exists, with Dr. Stephen Meyer, it's available on DVD for a gift of $49. You will learn how scientists have discovered that the universe had a definite beginning, a discovery that verifies the biblical statement, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." How space and time also had a beginning, a discovery that demands a transcendent cause beyond the physical universe itself, a cause which Christians call God. How the universe has been fine-tuned for human life to exist, and how design has been built into the very fabric of the laws and constants of physics, and how the digital code in the DNA molecule of every human cell is compelling evidence of an intelligent designer for the origin of human life. All 4 television programs in this important series are available on DVD for a gift of $49. Then second, our series, Does the New Scientific Evidence About the Origin of Life Put an End to Darwinian Evolution? Also with Dr. Stephen Meyer. In this series, you will learn how the human cell is complex beyond belief, a veritable micro-miniaturized factory containing thousands of exquisitely designed pieces of molecular machinery, how the 3 billion characters of precise digital code embedded in the DNA molecule is compelling evidence of an intelligent designer for the origin of human life. All 5 television programs in this series are available on DVD for a gift of $49. And third, we have written 2 new study guides with extensive notes that parallels each of our television series with Dr. Meyer. They are available for a gift of $8 each, or for 5 or more copies for $5 each. Fourth, we are making available 3 beautiful documentary films. First, Unlocking the Mystery of Life, which will transport you by state-of-the-art computer animation into the interior of the trillions of cells in our bodies to show you the systems and machines that are present and bear the unmistakable hallmarks of God's design. Second, the hour-long film documentary, The Privileged Planet, which will show you how the laws of physics are precisely fine-tuned for the existence of life, why Earth's environment provides a delicate and exceedingly rare cradle for complex life, and points to a universe that is designed by God. Third, the documentary film Darwin's Dilemma, which explores the Cambrian explosion of plants and animals. Where are the missing transitional fossils and links that Darwin postulated should be in the fossil record? Can any naturalistic evolutionary process explain this startling explosion of early plant and animal life? Or does the Cambrian fossil record point unmistakably to purpose and intelligent design? The 3 documentary movies are available for a gift of $45. And finally, if you would like to have all of the materials mentioned today, including the 2 television series, plus the 2 study guides, plus the 3 documentary movies, all of these materials together are available in a special package for only $129. And you may order this special package now by calling us at 1-800-805-3030. That's 1-800-805-3030. Or you may order these programs at our website at jashow.org. Next week on The John Ankerberg Show,
Fred Hoyle, the famous British astrophysicist, says that a common sense interpretation of the data suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry as well as biology to make life possible. I think Hoyle's exactly right here.